Change is coming. What do we need to imagine? Change is coming. What do we need to imagine to be prepared? I know I'm scared to be prepared. I know I'm scared, yes I know. From brokenness there's whole, yes I know. From brokenness there's whole, change is coming. Hello everybody in the AARC community and beyond. My name is Etta Heisler. I use she, her pronouns, and I've been a member of AARC for several years, but this year was the first year I was able to attend the member meeting. And this is the Devar that I gave, a little teaching on some words of wisdom, not from the Jewish tradition exclusively in this case, but from this book, Emergent Strategy, by a local organizer, activist, healer, storyteller, and writer, Adrienne Maree Brown. So because we didn't have all the recording pieces working, we forgot to press the button collectively. So I wanted to share my Devar from today's member meeting with you as we prepare to embark on the next year of our journey together in the Ann Arbor Reconstructionist congregation. So last week, Rena Bash sent out a blog post talking about our community as an ecosystem and drawing on some thoughts and ideas from Zingerman's. And so in the spirit of thinking about our community and congregation as an ecosystem, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk today about some ideas from Adrienne Maree Brown's text, Emergent Strategy. And Emergent Strategy draws on wisdom from nature and connects it to both the experience and strategy of social transformation. A few quick words on Adrienne Maree Brown. As I mentioned, she's a writer, facilitator, doula, activist, and she describes her work as growing healing ideas in public. And what I love about Brown, one of the many things I love, is that her worldview draws as heavily as it does from the thinking of activists and community organizers like Grace Lee Boggs, as it does from somatic healing ideas, as well as the science fiction writings and ideas of Octavia Butler. As usual, women and queer folks of color lead the way for us in theories of social transformation, and so I wanted to share some of these teachings today. When I was asked to give this Devar, I drove immediately over to my friend's house, who just borrowed this book, to pick it up from her. And I flipped immediately to the 6th chapter in the book, which is called Nonlinear and Iterative, The Pace and Pathways of Change. In this section, Brown describes the Occupy movement and the movement for Black Lives, also known as Black Lives Matter, as movements that grew from common longing, from a relinquishing of control, and from a celebration of leaderful transformation. When I reread that line, it hit me right in the kishkas. I mean, I felt it like a kick in my stomach. Leaderful transformation. I thought of my dread when I learned that Rabbi Ora was leaving our congregation, and the roller coaster of rabbinic interviews this spring, and then the joy and comfort of watching our community at High Holidays this fall. I felt hopeless on the day we learned of Rav Ora's departure in many ways. I felt leaderless and wandering, until everyone in our congregation showed me that in fact we are leaderful. It felt like I was looking at this room, the room of all of us gathered at the JCC, in the mirror, and I smiled. I actually got chills. And after some observations of these movements in the chapter, Adrienne Maree Brown goes on to describe grief as a time-traveling emotion. And I know it seems a little bit like a deviation, but it fits perfectly here in the text. And for those of you who've experienced grief, recognizing it as a time-traveling emotion may resonate with you as well. As many of you know, AARC has been a container, a conduit, and a comfort for me in my grief through the loss of my beloved Safta, my grandmother, through the general mourning of the pandemic, and then followed quickly by my niece's sudden death last fall. It is in this brief side discussion of the emotional experiences that come with transformation that Brown talks about the infinite paradoxes of grief. And she lists them, in fact, for nearly half a page. And in that list, she writes first that water seeks scale, that even your tears seek the recognition of community. And when I read that, I immediately imagined the room where we hold our Yiskor service each fall, filling to the ceiling with our tears and all of us swimming in it. A few lines down on the list, Brown writes that the sacred comes from the limitations. At this point, I put my book down and I repeated that phrase to myself. The sacred comes from the limitations. And into my mind came an image of a rose of Jericho, or a resurrection plant. It's a kind of moss that grows in valleys and dry riverbeds or wadis in the desert, shriveled and gray until the rain comes and then it opens up. I saw them when I was living and traveling in Israel-Palestine. And when the base of the valley fills with water, the stems and fronds of the moss get full and it unfurls and the wadi is briefly full of green. This is one way that nature has evolved for both scarcity and abundance. That in times where resources are low, creation becomes desiccated, curled in, protective, but it is also alive, resilient, observing, and waiting. And then when the rain returns, it blooms. Perhaps in our AARC ecosystem, I think we are a field of Jericho roses. The question is just whether it's the dry season or the rainy season. As the chapter continues, Brown describes a trip to Occupy Wall Street. And in some detail, she illustrates the variety of ways she observes people contributing and supporting one another in the context of a decentralized, leaderful movement built on people's longing, needs, and responses. I could smell it, I could hear it, the sound of raised voices rippling across the crowd, repeating words on the people's microphone, food tables, medics, tents everywhere, art and music. And then, in a new paragraph, all on its own, she writes one line. No one is special. Everyone is needed. We have a similar teaching in Judaism, in a Hasidic tale that explains that Reb Simcha Bunim carried 2 slips of paper, one in each pocket. On one, a phrase from the Talmud, "For my sake the world was created," and on the other, a line from Avraham in the Torah, "I am but dust and ashes." No one is special. Everyone is needed. Scarcity and abundance. Sacredness born of limitation. Paradoxes that have been around as long as desert moss and the times of our biblical forebears. At this point, Brown goes into some wonderful thoughts on anti-capitalism that are less relevant to the points I'm trying to make today, but they're still really good shit, so I think you should check out the book and read it for yourself. However, all of that sort of comes down to her thoughts on how we might think about the voices that are critical to change, whether they're voices in our community or within our own selves. The questioners, the what-ifers, the we have to know our goals before we can decide how to get here voices inside of us. Brown observes rightly, in my opinion, that because capitalism was created to make profit off of people, capitalism is best served when everyone agrees and takes predictable action together. But we all know that transformation just doesn't happen that way. Brown goes on to discuss that while critique is a necessary part of learning, and that iteration and transformation requires a feedback loop, transformation, as Brown puts it, requires a high tolerance of messiness and many, many paths being walked at once. She describes this messiness as chaotic beauty, though I like to think about it as beautiful cacophony. In other words, there are multiple melodies, numerous right ways, and furthermore, these ways must by their very nature be walked and explored in parallel, rather than one at a time. So, in the traditional conclusion of a Devar, what are we to glean from all of this? What wisdom can we draw as we embark on another year of our congregational evolution? How can we navigate these parallel and divergent paths and be curious and open to the iterations that stand before us, even if some of them confuse us or take us way off course. Brown has a perspective on this too. A metaphor offered by one of her teachers, Jenny Lee at Allied Media Projects. Brown writes that the role of organizers, of change makers in an ecosystem, is to be earthworms, processing and aerating soil, making fertile ground out of the nutrients of sunlight, water, and everything that dies to nurture the next cycle of life. In this paradigm Brown offers, everything we do either grows deeper roots or decomposes to leave lessons in the soil for the next attempt. In the AARC ecosystem, all of the efforts we share, all that we discuss, imagine, and make, every idea, conversation, question, experiment, disagreement, celebration, all of it makes the fertile ground from which the next blossom of our community will emerge. It will take us time. We will stumble and get turned in circles, and we will all need to cultivate it with our longing and curiosity. But to get there, we must simply do as Adrienne Maree Brown instructs us on page 120, right at the end of the chapter, and say to ourselves, I invest my energy in what I want to see grow. I belong to efforts I deeply believe in, and I will help shape those. May it be so. Kenya Hiratson.